Yay.
Thank you.
As this is Miami, we'll wait a couple of more minutes. We can. 15 years ago. We're in our 15th year. So 3 services back to back. We started once a month. And then a couple of years ago, people wanted more than once a month, but not every Sunday. Every Sunday was too much church. So we decided that the 2nd and 4th was good because everybody does something the first Sunday of the month. So 2nd and the 4th, but this is the first time we've had 3 back to back. And it's just the way it worked out. And we seem to have hung in okay. Better than okay, actually. So wait a couple of more minutes. Say hello to everybody. And let's see what we got here. Everybody okay, I take it? Everybody looks well? Everybody looks well. Serge Cruz has the plague. He's not sure if he has COVID, but he went and got tested, but he's got quite a flu.
Oh, is test results yet?
He's been.
Tara.
Tara? Oh, hello, Tara. Hi,
Is that from Gone with the Wind? Is there a Tara and Gone with the Wind?
Yeah, that's the name of the plantation, I think.
Yeah, it is.
When I adopted her, that was her given name when I adopted her. So I didn't change it.
She looks very, very happy with you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Tara, see, look, I got
Tara.
I got a sleepy paw here, Tara.
She's gone.
Hi, Tara. Oh.
Too much attention.
Okay, let's go ahead and begin and say hello to everybody. We got Pat Sullivan, a really good series of 32 signs from Clackamas United Church of Christ that were going against the tide, and made it to the national news where they were welcoming all kinds of people and going against the again culture war push of the right. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. It made it on the national news a couple of days later. Clackamas, I think, I want to say it's an old E&R congregation in Pennsylvania, because I know the name, but I can't remember placing it. But they were on national news, and Chris got it to us first. So thank you, Chris. So we've got our first time we've done 3 services back to back. The next one will be on the 25th of April. I want to do something futuring. I'm going to ask you what your idea is to give me a list of 5 things that you think about the future. Things are changing rapidly, and I like to have us do some futuring together as we try to prepare to stay grounded when everything is ungrounded. I have ideas about how we can do a face-to-face late fall. And Margarita and I were talking about that. We'll send out a questionnaire. We're going to continue with Zoom. There's no question about continuing with Zoom, but there's some options we have as well. So we don't have to do one or the other. That's the nice thing. So we can still do the regular Zoom, but I've got a couple of other ideas for face-to-face too. And Aurelie has offered us her house, so we don't have to go back to renting a major building and spending a lot of money. So that was very, very nice of Aurelie. You know, her room, that room is just absolutely lovely for chapel kinds of face-to-face experiences. Class begins next Saturday. For those of you who've been following this, we have a mob of people show up on Saturday morning at 10. We're going to be looking at Paul. Paul, and we're going to be looking at Paul, and then we're going to be looking at the Gospel of Thomas, which, if you haven't been aware of, is an absolutely fascinating counterpoint with Mark against John. Then we're going to be doing in world religion later on. Doug and some others have asked if we can do some world religion, so I thought I would introduce everybody to Hinduism, which is an absolutely poorly marketed in this country. Poorly marketed is a terrible way to put it, but it's true. And people didn't get the scary looking pictures. There's a reason why they are what they are, but nobody did the market. Nobody explained it right. Then we go to Buddhism, and it may shock all of you. Buddhism is not one. There are several types of Buddhism. So when somebody says to me, "You're a Buddhist," I have no idea what they're talking about. It's like when somebody says to me, "Are you a Christian or a Jew?" it's just like, it's so easy to talk about that here in Miami. When somebody says they're Hispanic, that doesn't mean anything. Somebody from Chile is not somebody from Ecuador. Ecuador is not Peru, and Peru is not Puerto Rico. My Hispanic students get this very, very quickly. So they get the diversity within religion and everybody using just one word. So we're going to be looking at Hinduism on Saturdays later on when we finish communities that started after Jesus died. And we'll be looking at Buddhism as well. Pictures, pictures, pictures. Let me remind everybody to send pictures. We like all kinds of things. Maureen Sullivan makes these very scary things that she posts on Facebook. I think it's food, but they move. So a picture there. Kay Schweitzer has come in from Port Orange too. We want to thank you to Margarita for doing the fill-in. Serge was supposed to do it till he got the plague. Oscar's was just this morning. Nanette's going to do reading. Remember, we always welcome readers. And finally, we could use one more, at least for the long-range planning committee. Sammy's on it. Mary Grimmy's on it. Joyce Anderson, Nick Osterman. They're all on the committee. These are going to be asking questions about how we want to go in the next several years. It's a futurism kind of thing, so we have an idea of what things people are looking for. And it's always good to do a long-range planning committee when you're healthy and things are going well. When a disaster hits is the worst time to try to prepare, because that's when too many decisions are made that are short-term and really don't help in the long term. So we're trying to think ahead. On that note, we will ask ourselves to take a memorial candle if you have one. I like this for two reasons. Number one, I want you to remember all of the immigrants that are still on our border. We have lots of people escaping really, really bad situations. And we still have a border control that is operating under the last administration in terms of attitude. So we've got a bad attitude. We're overwhelmed with people who are fleeing, a lot of them, horrible situations. It's a mess.
I'm sorry, Tom wasn't willing to listen to this.
So we need to remember all of those on both sides of the border, and hoping for health and respect and caring for each other and coming with a solution that is good for everybody. And that's what we light our candle for, a solution for everybody. And having said that, we have an introit, and we'll ask Margarita if she will put up the introit.
Can we also light the candle for the people of the Caribbean island of St. Vincent who are under evacuation from the volcano?
Okay, as well. Thank you. Thank you. How to write, and we will try and support them when we can. A call to worship from ancient Hindu writing. If you would please read that which is indented. Look to this day, for it is life, the very breath of life. In its brief course lie all the realities of your existence. The bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For today is only a dream, and tomorrow is but a vision, but today well lived makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. And for those of you who wish, if you would read a morning prayer with me, I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birth of the day of life and of love and wings, and of the gay, great happening illimitably earth. And how should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any, lifted from the know of all nothing, human merely being E. Cummings, you're so hard to read. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any lifted from the know of all nothing? Human merely being doubt, unimaginable you. And Oscar, if you would. We have this morning 4 very, very different readings. They will strike you, no doubt, as very, very strange, but bear with me and have patience. They are all linked. And I've asked Nanette to be kind enough to read today, and she'll be reading the 4 of them. The first 2, one is from Genesis, and the second reading is from 1 Samuel. If you would be so kind, Nanette. Nanette, you have to unmute.
So sorry.
Welcome welcome to All Souls. We do this all the time. Go ahead.
Okay. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed, wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. The fighting grew fierce around Saul. And when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." But his armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men died together that same day.
A responsive reading by those who would wish, if you would read the indented. We need to be angels for each other, to give strength and consolation. The heart can get really cold if all you've known is winter. Even among familiar faces, people often feel invisible and desolate like an island in cold waters or a shadow apart from the crowd. Be the reason another never feels alone. The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate. Hence, we must support one another, console one another, mutually help, counsel, and advise. For the measure of everyone's virtue is best revealed in time of adversity, adversity that does not weaken, but rather shows who we are. And again, Nanette will read for us.
On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." But they covered their ears, and with a loud shout, all rushed together against him. Then they dragged him out of the city and began to stone him. While they were stoning Stephen, he prayed, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Then he knelt down and cried out in a loud voice, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." When he had said this, he died. That day, a severe persecution began against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout the countryside of Judea and Samaria. Devout men buried Stephen and made loud lamentation over him.
Thank you very much, Nanette. And Margarita will play all the music through. Grant us, we ask, to speak, to hear, and to learn, so that our fears may be banished, our minds may become enlightened, our faith be increased, our steps directed towards you. Amen. I'd like to share with you a little bit background about those 4 passages we read from both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament. When you get rid of the editorials and you get rid of different midrash and stuff, the story of Abraham is in many ways, we're guessing that he probably existed. A group of semi-nomads moves from what was now Baghdad and that area up into what is now Turkey, and then down the coast, and finally over a period of time settled in the land of Canaan, which is roughly what modern Israel is today. That group will then find itself being involved with and being introduced to and ultimately intermarrying many, many different kinds of people. You're going to find the word Hittite a lot mentioned in the Old Testament. Turkey is where the great, huge Hittite empire was, and it was big, and it was very fascinating. And Egypt is always a player. In this story, Abraham is married to Sarah, and she can't have children, and so they do the surrogate thing. The surrogacy has been around a very, very long time. And so Hagar becomes the bearer of Abraham's first child, Ishmael. And as often happens, I'm sure this comes as no surprise to anybody, there are women who are menopausal or older who have suddenly get pregnant. And I think everybody knows a great aunt or somebody like her may have happened in your family where that's happened. And the phrase used to be, ever hear the phrase a caboose? Somebody has children, and then along comes years later, another child. They call it a caboose because the child is 10, 15 years separated from the rest of his siblings or her siblings. So we say that the scriptures say that Ishmael is 12 years old and he's seeing Isaac and playing with Isaac as a little child. And Sarah gets jealous. The bottom line is she's jealous about Hagar, and she also is worried about inheritance. She doesn't want Ishmael to share in Isaac's inheritance. So she gets, this is not a pretty story at all, she gets Abraham to basically throw, not basically, he throws Hagar and the boy out into the desert. And this is supposed to act as a nice thing. I thought it's pathetic. He gives them some water and some bread. This is not a pretty story. And the baby, she puts the baby away because she can't bear to see the baby, that the child dies. A young boy's 12 or 13 at this point. And she starts to cry. Now, ultimately, they will survive this. And Ishmael will go on to have a lot of tribes after him. He'll go on to have a lot of children. You might be interested in knowing that Esau will marry one of Ishmael's daughters. It's a small world. Ishmael turns out, by the way, when you actually read the text, to be better off ethically and morally than the rest of the bunch in many ways. Let me read you something that I still can't get over. He's a far better man than I am. Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac. Abraham lived 175 years. Of course, this is an exaggeration. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age. An old man full of years, he was gathered to his people. Now listen to the next sentence from Genesis. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave near Mamre. Ishmael goes back to join Isaac in burying the old man. I still can't get over that. I, to the life of me, can't understand how Ishmael could be so kind and so gracious and so loving to go back and bury the man that tossed him out in the desert to die. It amazes me. It is a story that reeks of sadness. And how do you talk about that? Seriously, how do you tell anybody, well, who's your father? Well, he's Abraham. Do you see your father? Well, not really. Why? Oh, he tossed us out in the desert to die. You know you're going to carry that with you for the rest of your life. Are you going to forget that? Think about that. But who do you share it with? You're 12 or 13. You've been tossed out in the desert to die. You see your mother absolutely obliterated with fear and anxiety. How do you talk about that? Do you carry that with you? Talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome. My heavens, for Hagar and for Ishmael. Next thing, next story. Saul and the ragtag lot of Israelites. You know, Saul gets a bad rap. And I'm glad we don't have to defend doctrine and dogma. I really am. It's very, very clear that the 12 tribe thing isn't working well at all. They compete against one each other. There's a lot of jealousy. The Philistines are on the coast. They have 12 big cities. Their trading is really good, and they have mercenary armies. Why? Because they can afford to, and they don't have that many people. And so they grab land. Why would they grab land from the 12 tribes? Because there's olive orchards. Olives are big business, even 2,000 years ago. So you grab olive orchards and you grab land that has olive orchards and you grab some land so you can do grazing. And there's one nice thing about where the Israelites are located, the 12 tribes, with the exception of Dan, which looks like it's a disaffected Philistines, actually. The other 11 tribes are located on nice ground, actually, where you can do a lot of raising of crops and animal husbandry, and the Philistines will grab some. So the 12 tribes from time to time gather together to fight the Philistines. They're fighting mercenaries. They get clobbered. Finally, it becomes clear they need to get together, and lo and behold, they have to do something they can't stand. They need a king. They can't stand the idea of a monarchy, but everything else is not working well. So imagine this happens, just to give you an idea how this works. All of you here have elected Oscar to be the king. Oscar obviously is a nice guy. We all like Oscar. We all swear up and down to each other, yes, we do, that we're going to work with Oscar. Do we? No. No, you can't stop bad behavior. I swore to Oscar that I'm going to supply him 5,000 troops and umpteen things of grain and blah, blah, blah. I give him 100 troops, not 5,000, and I'm complaining all about it, and I want to get paid. That's not what I said. Every one of you make great promises, and you don't do squat. So the Philistines are raiding again. He comes, gathers what he can gather, and fights them, and an archer finds him. Mortally wounds him, and he realizes if they capture him while he's alive, they will do what they did back then and do today as well. You strip the man naked, you cut off his ears, then you cut off his genitals, you make sport with him while he's alive, and then you finally kill him after you've made great sport. To stop that, he asks his armor bearer to take his life so he will not be around so they can make fun of him and insult the tribes as well. No, the armor bearer won't do it, so he falls on his sword. He commits suicide. Now, how do you begin, as what's left of his family, to explain how he died? In fact, it was so bad that the Philistines took his body and hung him outside the gate of one of their small forts to show how bad the Israelites are in terms of their leadership. At night, some friends go and cut him down and bury him in an unmarked grave. Part of the reason it's unmarked is obviously so they won't find him, but the other part is the superstition that when you commit suicide, you can't say anything. Now look, if somebody commits suicide and you're close to them, do you grieve? Yes, of course you grieve. And by the way, I'll get into that in a minute about suicide. Now, we have Jesus with the lepers. Leprosy, as you know, is really Hansen's disease, and it's dealt with today. But back then, they didn't, like so many diseases, they didn't know what it was. It disfigured you. You lost your nose. You lost pieces of your body withering away and stuff like that. And you were horribly disfigured. Everyone was scared to death of you. And they see him, but they're absolutely scared to death. They're at a distance, and they call out. Did any of you ever have a disease that you didn't want to mention, but you had to carry it around with you? All kinds of people have things they don't want to mention, but it causes them a great deal of grief. Am I making sense to everybody? Or we have somebody in the family. Number 4. Stephen dies because he has a point of view of faith and he's stoned to death. We would label this, if we were honest, homicide, but you know the way this works in this country. Sometimes it's called death by misadventure. That's an old phrase. Have you ever heard that? Death by misadventure. You have a friend or a member of the family that gets murdered. Does anybody talk about it? Very few people talk about or mention the fact that somebody's been murdered in the family. Now, where am I going with all of this? I have to share with you, my ignorance never ceases to amaze me. Seriously. On a light note, last night we were watching, by the way, I just throw this out parenthetically. If you want some humor, you need to discover Netflix, and you need to discover foreign film comedy, and you need to discover Spanish foreign film. The Spanish are absolutely insane with their humor. We watched a very funny thing last night from Argentina. Argentina has a Spanish language that they pronounce as if it was Italian. It's absolutely fascinating. Anyway, in the midst of this, at the end of the movie, they are at the Mountain of 14 Colors. Has anybody ever heard of the Mountain of 14 Colors in Argentina? Oh, you're as ignorant as I am. Wait till you look this up. You're going to say to yourself, where have you been? Write this down. It is the fascinating natural thing I have ever seen. It is a mountain with ridges with 14 different colors. You've got to see it. There's one with 7 colors in Peru, but this one in Argentina, you've got to look it up. Make a note of that. So my ignorance, you know, there are things that I should know, and it amazes me that I have never stumbled upon this. Let me read to you this. This is a thing that was out in the UU. by clergy writing to other clergy. And I try to look at this thing when it comes out weekly because I'm always aware of things I have mixed up. My friend Colleen says, I learned a new phrase yesterday and I thought I could use some publicity. Disenfranchised grief. I never heard of the phrase. Then I read the definition. I thought, Claus, where have you been? You know, you weren't ordained last week. Hello. Disenfranchised grief is a grief that is not acknowledged by society because its context is socially unacceptable or awkward to acknowledge and therefore is suppressed. Some examples. And some examples are abortion, having a miscarriage, discovery of domestic violence, incest or sexual abuse or rape, death of a loved one by suicide, getting fired or downsized, the breakup of an extramarital affair, loss of a home due to financial hardship, loss of a beloved pet. So I looked this up and I find that the phrase disenfranchised grief was developed by or coined by a guy named Ken Daka in the 1980s. He's a famous grief counselor. And he says, there are the regular griefs that you and I all know. Somebody dies, that kind of grief. But he said you go online, and I'm not joking, there is a list of 64 different kinds of griefs that people experience, and most of them are buried. I went to this list, and before I get to the list, Daka suggests there's a loss that isn't worthy of grief. Society thinks, well, you don't pay any attention to that. There's a relationship that's stigmatized. Well, that doesn't count. The mechanism of death is stigmatized, suicide or an overdose. A grieving person is not recognized as a griever. You know, what do you do when you have an ex-partner or ex-coworker that dies? Why would you be grieving them? Well, people do grieve ex-partners and ex-wives and ex-husbands. They're not sure why, but they do. And the way somebody grieves, you know, we all grieve in different ways. I told you my brother and I thought we were handling, my stepfather dies in July, my mother dies in March. And given the fact they were together almost 70 years, dying 6 or 7 months apart, we knew was probably going to happen. They were both 94. My brother and I thought we were handling it really well. So what did we do? And I make fun of this because it shows how we think we know stuff, we don't. My brother all of a sudden hits 2 really bad days where he goes into a dark hole. I said, Fred. And then I stop and I call him back again to talk about this. And he talked to his counselor and stuff. He got out of it. But we thought we were doing well. And I thought, well, I'm just doing fine, until I realized I became a serious workaholic. I put 3 services together, have a whole bunch of 100 and some outlines come in, 100 and some Judaism quizzes come in. I have 3 weddings. Hello, do you do that at 76 years old with a heart transplant? No, you don't do it when you're 30 years old. And I'm handling it so well. I became a super workaholic. So my brother and I said to him, yeah, we really did not handle this grief at all. We thought we're going to find we don't need to grieve. Grief will be fine. Grief comes, whether you wish it or not. It sometimes is welcome and sometimes it's an unwelcome guest, but it arrives. As Rumi would says, this guest house that is you has arrivals, some that are unexpected. It's a famous poem by Rumi. You is a guest house. Your body is a guest. Think about that. Your life is a guest house. And things arrive unannounced all the time. Grief is one of them. So I looked at this list. Let me read to you of some of the things that we grieve about. And I say we, I mean everybody here. We've known people who've died by suicide. And I should really have a share about suicide because I have never understood. Yeah, I understand the dogma. You have no right to sin against God. The idea was you're sinning against God. I never bought that for a minute. Even when I was growing up, I didn't buy it because if somebody's life is so sad and so stressed and so painful, and they've got no relief anywhere, and you don't understand how isolated they are, how could you not have just cry that they were that isolated and lonely? And I always said, if God is loving and God is kind, God wouldn't want a person to be that sad and lonely and that much in pain, emotionally or physically. So I never bought the idea. Maureen just pointed out there's a high rate of suicide in our agencies. There's a lot of high rate of suicide in a lot of things today. And I'll tell you this, and without getting into another tangent, I certainly understand if you're loaded with cancer and you don't want to be stuck in a hospital someplace with a cold thing. If somebody said to you, I understand assisted suicide. I understand euthanasia. And this may surprise everybody, but I have been for that from the very beginning. I have seen too many people dying in the hospital. Other than doctors and nurses, who sees more than a minister? By the way, I almost got thrown out. I came this close to getting thrown out of Mass General Hospital in the first year of my ministry. I had a guy who got married. He and the second marriage for both. He was like 45 years old, a school teacher, really loved. He was not feeling well. It turns out he had an inoperable metastasized tumor in his stomach the size of a small melon. He was in great pain. The doctors gave him 2 to 3 weeks to live, and he was in great pain. And so I said to the young doctor, why aren't you giving him morphine? And he said to me, well, we don't want him to get addicted. I almost killed the doctor with my bare hands. I lost my temper, yelled at the doctor. He said, I'll have you. I said, you're an idiot. Who cares whether he gets addicted at 3 months to 3 weeks to live? Are you an idiot? They had to call the nurses. I said, this guy shouldn't be practicing medicine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They said, he could die from this. I said, he's dying in pain. I thought your job is to do no harm. Anyway, a nurse who lived in Saugus. Oh, yes. Where is Ed? Ed, a nurse lived in Saugus heard about this because she was on the floor to me, you're an embarrassment. I said, I don't care whether I'm an embarrassment. The guy has 3 weeks to live. She said, he just died. What, a week later? She said, yeah, a week later. And he was in great pain, wasn't she? She said, yeah, I know. We had to have a big talk about this. So I understand that there are times when enough is enough. So, but there's this thing. Nobody likes to say anything about suicide. There's like this taint. What? People have drug overdoses, accidentally and on purpose. It's down here, death of a pet. There are people who don't understand when you lose a pet. I have to keep reminding myself this. You say, you didn't lose a pet, you lost one of your best friends. I will not get into my rant that I trust dogs more than I trust most human beings because it's true. You can say, Reverend, that's not good. I don't care. I said to my students, you've heard me say this. If zombies came into the classroom and I had my dachshunds, you'd be gone so fast they would stay with me to the bitter end. You would be gone in a heartbeat. How do you explain this? I told my friends and students, if your pet dies, you really can't explain it to people who don't understand pets. To everybody else, all you have to say is you name your pet and die. People understand. But there's this kind of thing in real society. If your pet died, you're like, why is there still grieving? The wizard, my first wizard, my 32-pound solid muscle dachshund lived with me 1/4 of my life when he finally died. I still remember him. Ed Johnson remembers Cromwell. Cromwell, yes, an old English sheepdog, Cromwell. What a name. Ed, do you remember him like yesterday? Yes. Everybody who has remembers your pets, all of them. In fact, we went so far as we saved all of the ashes, and we told in our will that we want our bodies to be weighted. And when we go, we want the kids to get an oak tree or something like that to put our ashes in, the dogs and cats' ashes in, and then the tree on top. It's very druid, but we all want to be together. It's a symbolic gesture. Some people would like a baby, and they grieve honestly that they can't have one. And people don't understand that. But somebody who really, really, and there are other people who don't want a baby and have them. I mean, I have never understood that. You lose a home. It's foreclosed. And you're grieving, but you're feeling shame that it was foreclosed because you didn't have the money. So you not only have the shame of not having the money, you're in grief. And who's there to comfort you? You lose a sibling. Loss of somebody by homicide. I don't know if any of you remember anybody who died from AIDS, but I was in the ministry when AIDS was hit. And my very first intern, David Matheson, came out. There was a meeting of UCC clergy in Boston. And he was one of several seminarians that came out. And he was there at my ordination. And he then goes out to California, and I hadn't heard from him for a few years. His sister called me, and she said, David has AIDS. And I called him, and there was no medicine. And it was a horrible, horrible death. And then I remember other people I had met who died of AIDS. This is before, and before you couldn't mention it. It was like if you had it, you deserved it. And that's when I wanted to punch people. And I thought, Kenneth, you can't go punching people because they say something like that. First of all, you can't do it. Second, you'll get defrocked. And I can see why. You can't come up with your collar on, punch somebody when they said, well, they deserve to die of AIDS. Who does that? People did that. What do you do when you lose your job? There's tremendous grief. What do you lose when you lose your career? There's grief. When you move, I've always been very fortunate to always like to wherever I have moved. But there are lots of people who don't move because they want to move. They have no choice. They have to move. And they leave behind friends and places and things. A lot of people, and I have to remember this. It's a fault of mine. A lot of people really get anchored to a spot in a place. Our daughter's like that. Our daughter, Ellie, she was raised in Miami. She went to school in Miami. She still lives in Miami. She had her kids here in Miami. Miami's her thing. There are lots of people who like to stay where they're born. Lots. One of my friends had a gay couple, his friends who were both died of AIDS. Yeah, you're all putting things up on the screen. You all know what I'm talking about. And you grieve. And so you have to move. I can guarantee you if Ellie had to move, she'd be heartbroken. She'd be in major grief because this is what anchors her. There are people like that. I'm kind of a semi-nomad, I think. I think some of us are semi-nomadic. We can move and just enjoy that. But not everybody's like that. What do you do when you lose a child at childbirth? What do you do when you have a miscarriage? What do you do when, this sounds strange, we're all superstitious. Here's one, I'm still grieving the loss of my career. Yes. And what do you do when we're superstitious. I would bring this up in world religion class, and you'll all love this. And I say, are any of you here superstitious? Oh, no. So we're going out to a parking lot. So all these kids have things hanging from the rearview mirror. So I would go up to the car. I said, whose car is this? And stewardess said, here, let me remove this thing from the rear. No, don't touch it. I said, oh, you have these trinkets, these things hanging down, but you don't want me to touch them, but you're not superstitious. No. Oh, we all have things that we like. And when they get misplaced, we go nuts. Have you ever misplaced something and gone absolutely nuts trying to find it? Yes. And if you lose it, you go nuts. You go absolutely nuts. Then you feel grief because you're showing too much grief or you're not showing enough grief. What do you do when somebody's disappeared? Somebody's run away? What do you do when you've lost your independence? What do you do when you have to go in assisted living? What do you have to do if you've been incarcerated? What do you do when you have a faith crisis and you've lost everything that you hold dear and you're now wandering in the desert of no faith and no hope? What do you do when you have a doctor you rely upon and they suddenly die? I don't know if you ever remember this. I'm showing my age, but in the 70s and 80s, the big thing was if you are seeing a therapist, do not get in trouble in August. August was the great month that therapists took off. And I think they didn't allow anybody on Martha's Vineyard because it was all loaded with therapists. They didn't allow any ferries or any boats or planes to come in. But the thing was, if you have a therapist, don't take off in August. And people would go into all kinds of grief because their therapist was gone and you could not get hold of them. There are 64 examples of grief, disenfranchised grief. So I have a couple of observations to share with you because I think we've all been there. Number one, your grief is real. I don't care what anybody else says. You're feeling it. If you're grieving, it's real. If you're feeling loss and grief, it is real. It's not made up. You're feeling it. Let's be clear about that. Say, oh, that's not. No, you are feeling it. Number two, why is it in times of grief we forget our own theology? In our understanding of faith and life, grief is not a time of shame. There may be other religious traditions that associate certain types of grief with shame, but we do not. Let us remind ourselves that the faiths that we hold dear are faiths of support and love and grounding to help us get through, not of shame and making us feel worse. I need to remind us that if you're going to be people at All Souls, that you hold up a sense of trying to being able to navigate this strange mixed affair we call life. And that does not mean shaming or making it worse. It means you accept your grief and that is normal and human, and this is the way you're feeling. There's no shame in this. Number three, I put true friend time. I put true friend time. You know, if you have a time of grief and you go to turn to a friend and they don't help you, you need new friends. And I'm serious. There are times when you need to let go. I have seen this happen too many times where people are surrounded by fair weather friends. And then when stuff happens, you find out who your true friends are. And I keep on thinking of Harry Potter. I don't know why, but there are all these people in this Hogwarts school, and there are two people that never get mentioned, and I had my students write about it. They were two square pegs in a round hole. Luna Lovegood, God only knows where her head was. She always showed up, got tortured, got beaten, got everything else, and was still at the very end when all hell had broken loose. And there's Harry sitting there in a state of grief and shock. She says, you need to be by yourself. I'll take care of this. And she's going to make it some weird thing and spare the day. The other person who comes by, who turns out to be a hero at the end too, is Neville Longbottom. These two are like people know. So I had my students write an essay on who are the Neville Longbottoms and Luna Lovegoods in your life that you're not paying attention to, because they're going to be the ones there when the stuff hits the fan and you need help and nobody's going to be around. When you're grieving, if you don't have friends to bear to be with, then you need new friends. And if you have one friend that will be there to understand, treasure them like an art. Yes, he was very timid, but turned out to be very brave. Yeah, Neville Longbottom, by the way, was through the last Horcrux, the snake. Yes, Neville of all people was a square peg in a round hole. You will have somebody close to you, very close. It may be a son, daughter, it may be a friend. You will have somebody. Remember, a close friend is priceless. Somebody, maybe a sibling, somebody that you can trust. Yes, by the way, Neville, by the way, had to wear a fat suit to the very end. Now you see him, he's this handsome model type, but he was a great actor and played the role. You guys need to be sure you have a good friend and treasure them. And by the way, it may be a spouse. I remember in the 70s, this is so embarrassing, the things therapy went through. I remember taking a class on marriage and therapy. They said, do not marry your best friend. And I said to myself, that doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you marry your best friend? Well, because you're gonna stifle them. You're gonna dump all your stuff in your lap. And I thought, yeah, but they dump their stuff in your lap, and you help each other through. Isn't what marriage is about? Finding somebody that's like Dr. Seuss says, we're all a little weird. You find somebody weird like you, and you fall in weird loveness, and you do it. If it doesn't work, you find somebody else. You try and try until you find somebody that helps you get through. So treasure your friends. Yo, All Souls is a friend. If you're going through a grief, don't do it by yourself. That's why we are here. I think I can say this very honestly. There's not one person here this morning or any morning that's at All Souls when we gather that wouldn't embrace you in your grief. No matter how alone you may think, I would stake everything that I have on being able to be with this group and to give you a collective hug and to be with you. Everybody here has been through crap. One of the nice things about knowing your congregation is you know all the stuff that people have been through. People will know. And frankly, a congregation isn't any good unless it can hug its own when people are going through disenfranchised grief. That's what really, really, really counts. I have two other observations. I have found euphemisms to be very helpful today. My students taking the last quiz were looking at an old quiz, and they screwed up badly. So I developed the euphemism, extra resources. Do you like that? I said, I'm not going to scream at you because you were cheating and plagiarizing looking at an extra quiz. I'm going to try a different route. You availed yourself of extra resources. They roared. That worked. And I said, extra resources have been changed regularly. So knock it off. They listened, they laughed, they got it. Do you like the word extra resources? I find today, if you word the word counseling, counseling is overused. You say counseling, people don't. So I said to my students, how do you like the phrase tune-up? Oh, yes. I said, you tune up your car. Yeah. You take your dogs and cats in for a tune-up regularly. Yes. Yes. Well, what about you? Aren't you more important than your car? Think about that. I said, if you're going through disenfranchised grief, a tune-up might be in order. Think about that. Remember, and I speak with great experience on this, counseling works if you want it to work. If somebody makes you go, forget it. It's a waste of time and money. But if you go because you genuinely want to go, great things can happen. Sometimes you have ideas, but you need to voice it with somebody who will help you rediscover your voice within. And a good therapist can help you reconnect with yourself. Am I right? Can help you reconnect with yourself. It's a tune-up. Do it. And if you're not sure, call me and I'll help you along do it. I'm not good at doing tune-ups because I don't have the time. You need somebody who has the time to do it, but I will encourage and support. And I'm here if you need some disenfranchised grief support and help to that. What do you think you're paying me for? What do you think I'm here? That's what we do, folks. And finally, if medicine is involved, take medicine. There are people who don't like taking medicine. you realize I wouldn't be here if I didn't take medicine. Think about that for a moment. I have to take heart transplant medicine. It's severely reduced, but I still have to take it every day. Many of you are on meds, and the meds are helping you along. Let's be honest. So some things about disenfranchised grief. Your grief is real. Remember, in our faith, there is no shame for any of these griefs. We are real. We are human. We feel those. We do not believe that there is some entity out there that gets ticked off at you regularly. If there is a divine reality, that divine reality wants love and support and care and nurturing, not shaming you when you're in deep grief. It's true friend time. Always be sure we nurture our true good friend or friends. Remember, All Souls is you, and we support each other. In good fundamentalist churches, one of the things people can do, and I always applaud this, is they can have a testimony about when they're feeling down and hurt. And in some communities, you can get up and say, I feel hurtful today. I feel this. Would you remember me in your prayers? And I thought one good thing about a community is when somebody can do that and know people will not be judging, but say, yes, we envelop you in our thoughts and wishes and prayers and all of that to give you support. Tune-ups are good. They help us rediscover and reconnect with our authentic self. And if meds are required, remember the meds. They can be very, very kind to us and for us. Disenfranchised grief. Let's love each other, care for each other, respond to each other. Amen. One of the ways of health is remembering the meal and welcoming one another. And we follow a pattern that was established long before Jesus, but in our background, it was reintroduced to us by Jesus's meals with so many others. As was the ancient custom, people took simple bread and they broke it and they put it on a plate and they offered to people reclining around the table. And they took simple watered down wine and poured it into a cup. And as they reclined around pillows, they would offer a simple bread and cup to any and all. It's an act of welcome, of friendship and support. And so we too, though we're doing this virtually, symbolically offer to everybody here a bread and cup of support and welcome and friendship. And following that, we say these words that echo this, and I'll ask you if you would quietly read those to me together, with me together. Promise me you'll remember. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, smarter than you think. God didn't promise days without pain, laughter without sorrows, sun without rain. But the divine did promise strength for the day, comfort for the tears, and light for the way. Our black chip, and let me remind you, if you need black chips, to email me and we will send some to you. The black chip, again, we would like to be very honest and say this was unique to us. We stole it. We didn't borrow it. We stole it outright from NA and AA. It's a great idea. If you're going to be with us and you have something that's bothering you, sometimes it's good to take something with you to remind you that you've got something to work on. Now, does anybody have one to lift up of things that they've worked on, that they want to hold up a black chip, that they've worked on it and they're okay? Does anybody need to take a black chip, pick up a black chip for something that's bothered them this week? All right, then we've had a good week with Margarita is picking up a black chip. All right. Anybody
Serge
else?
Cruz. Yes, Serge Cruz is picking up a black chip.
Serge and Margarita. All right. A final prayer and then some parting music, a blessing, and then a time to say goodbye before we all leave. May the blessings of the divine be upon us in this hour and in the days to come, that we may seek the truth more devotedly, that we may think more independently, that we may reflect more searchingly, that we may know and care for ourselves more completely, that we may forgive more quickly, we may pray more thoughtfully, we may act more courageously, we may live more nobly. A great parting song, All You Need Is Love. I have to be honest with you, if I could end every worship service with Rick Springsteen's This Little Light of Mine or the Beatles' Love, 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 I'd be happy forever. They're just great ways. A blending of Irish and Hindu thought. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall softly upon your fields. And when we meet again, may the divine in me greet and embrace the divine in you. Amen. Before we go, let's say hello again one more time to everybody.